You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Welcome to Let's Talk Sustainable Business, a podcast hosted by the Conference Board's Global Sustainability Center. I'm your host, Claudia Lee. I'll be talking to leaders of global corporates and startup founders about how they integrate business and sustainability. It may be challenging, but these companies show that it is definitely feasible. Now, let's talk sustainable business. Today, I'll be speaking to Lene Serpa from Maersk. Lene is the head of corporate sustainability and ESG at Maersk. Maersk is the world's largest container shipping company, and this Denmark based company also offers integrated logistics and supply chain services. In 2022, they announced that its goal is to reach net zero by 2040, which is 27 years from now. My guest today has been with Maersk since 2011, and she now leads the corporate sustainability and ESG team, where she heads initiatives including ESG reporting, governance, and ESG and sustainability trend spotting. She has also co-authored a book called Squaring the Sustainability Circle, a book that deals with the complicated question of how to create value for both organizations and society. Now, I'd like to welcome my guest onto the podcast.
Thank you, Claudia. Thanks for the invitation and really appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast and speak to you.
Yes, I've been looking forward to speak to you for quite a while. So I'm glad we're finally able to sit here today to talk about all about Maersk's sustainability initiatives. And this is a very exciting time because I read recently that Maersk has just introduced a green ethanol initiative. And this will be something I'll ask you a little bit more later. But what I'm trying to say is that I know you guys have a lot in store. So it's great to be able to speak to you at this moment. So let's start off with a summary of Maersk's net zero goals. I know you are committed to delivering net zero supply chains by 2040. Would you be able to break it down a little bit for us and tell me some of the milestones you'll put in place to make this happen?
Yes, I can do that. And actually, just a small correction in terms of your introduction, because you said it's 27 years from now, but it's actually 17 years from now, right? 24. So, yeah, exactly. Yes, that's what we did. No, that's okay. But we did indeed in early 22, we announced an acceleration of our net zero goals. In 2018, the end of 2018, we had for the first time set a net zero target. And at the time, we set a goal for net zero by 2050, covering our ocean business. And the reason for focusing in on that it was indeed the recognition all at the time coming after by then 10 years of working very systematically with our sustainability agenda and also with including sustainability in this case as we define this term in Maersk, we actually include the broad scope of environment, social, and governance factors within when we talk about sustainability. But also specifically when it comes to on the climate side, we had already then been working very systematically with reducing our greenhouse gas footprint, working on reducing relative CO2 efficiency. But we recognized that that would never in itself get us to zero, where we needed to be as an industry in order to actually align with and live up to the expectations of the Paris Agreement. So that was the first big step at the end of 2018, setting that net zero goal for 2050, but also at the time being clear that, or being honest and open about the fact that we actually didn't know how we were exactly going to get there. But this was sort of a call to action to ourselves, to the industry, to our partners, to say we need to find out what are the green fuels that will decarbonize shipping. Actually, what we found working then very intensely with this over the next few years was that we could actually make progress much faster than we had first anticipated. So the first milestone that we had set for ourselves was to say, if we are going to be in net zero by 2050, we need to have the first vessel, the first green enabled vessel on the water by 2030. Because of the long asset cycles in the industry, that was the logic behind saying 2030 is the first milestone. Actually, the first methanol enabled vessel, green methanol enabled vessel, will actually be coming already this year. So it's going to be arriving 7 years ahead of the original time plan. And the reason we've been able to accelerate that is that we actually relatively quickly found that the technologies do exist to operate vessels based on green fuels, and that we could actually, again, by stepping up, by making an order for vessels with the engine, with the design of the engine made in such a way that it would be able to run on green methanol. By going out and taking that leadership step again of pushing the industry ahead and saying we will make the order for vessels that can sail on green methanol. We did that in 2021, the first time. We can now see that it's actually, we are seeing the results. We are beginning to see the decarbonization of shipping actually coming into reality. Another step that we were able to take quite quickly was actually to begin to develop low carbon solutions for our customers. So already in 2019, we launched an ocean shipping product called Eco Delivery, which actually is based on sustainable biofuels, and that means that we can use that as a drop-in fuel to existing vessels. So, without making changes to the vessels or the fleet, you can use this as a drop-in fuel. The challenge is it doesn't scale. There's a limited availability of biofuels, and in particular, when we have very stringent standards in place for what we will accept. Will only be based on waste products, etc. And that means
Sorry,
it's not
Lene,
something.
can
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
quickly pause for a question? So,
Yes,
for
sorry.
some of the listeners might not be as familiar with the different categories of renewable and green fuels.
Mhm.
And you mentioned that biofuels and green methanol is not really the same,
No.
because biofuels you can operate in your existing vessels, from what I understand, whereas
Yeah.
green methanol you'll need new vessels. So, can you briefly explain what the difference is?
Yes, I can do my best. I'm not an engineer, but for those
It's okay.
who are and who would like the more detailed insights, there's a wealth of information on our website, and also some very informative small videos that we've actually put together to answer exactly these questions on the fuel pathways, etc. But generally speaking, yeah, there is the let's say the range of fuel options that we have when it comes to being able to sail to have green shipping, and our definition for that is also made quite clear. We have standards for when we call a fuel green. We have specific expectations for the amount of CO2 of greenhouse gas reductions that the fuel delivers across the entire life cycle. But then the options are, first of all, as I mentioned, drop-in fuels such as biodiesel, which we use today for the eco delivery product. As it said, it does deliver uh, verified CO2 emissions reductions. However, the challenge is this fuel is not scalable to the extent that we need for the global network in order to decarbonize our entire network. Then there are other options which our engineers have examined, and the conclusion is that green methanol is the fuel, the green fuel that's available already today. Methanol in itself is a fuel that can be used in shipping today. You can produce it to green standards, which means that in this way it lives up to the expectations that we have for our decarbonization ambition. And you can do that, as I said, already today. However, the challenge is that the current global production of green methanol is very, very small. It's an industry which basically did not exist about a year ago. So the key focus that we have is to work with strategic partners, fuel producers, to incentivize the scale up of capacity for green methanol production. It can be developed in a couple of ways. One, based on biomass as green biomethanol. It can also be produced through renewable um, electricity power to X technologies as e-methanol. But the advantage is that it can be done in such a way that we will be able to deliver progress already this decade. There are other green fuel options such as ammonia, which also holds a lot of promise. However, right now it's not mature enough as a technology. There's some significant safety concerns, for example, environmental concerns, which have to be addressed before it can be really taken into use by the shipping industry. So we do not foresee that ammonia will be relevant as a green fuel until towards the end of this decade.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you so much. Um, so actually, that when you mentioned green methanol, I actually thought about whether electric vehicles is another. I guess electric vessels is another option that you might have considered.
Well, the thing is that with the types of vessels that we have in our fleet, container vessels, they're so large and require, of course, so much fuel to sail from one end of the world to another, that it's simply not possible to use, for example, battery technologies or electric. There are cases you can see some examples of other companies that perhaps operate ferries sailing short distances where you can then have use electricity as a propulsion source, right? But that's not possible for the container vessels. Um, yeah, but then of course, and just to then expand a little bit. So I've been talking a lot about our ambitions and our commitments on shipping so far, and leading up to, of course, as I said, we were able to actually accelerate our commitment to say we actually believe we can make progress faster and be at net zero by 2040. What we also did then early 2022 was we actually expanded the scope of our ambition. So we said we will be net zero in 2040, not only for our ocean shipping operations, but across all of our business segments and across our supply chain. So including scopes 1, 2, and 3, right? If you from the perspective of greenhouse gas emission scopes. And that means that we're also working hard to find solutions to decarbonize our logistics operations and our terminal operations. And of course, here there are other technologies such as also, for example, electric trucks and and other solutions.
I see. So you mentioned the accelerated goal is to reach net zero by 2040, and that includes all scopes 1, 2, and 3.
Mm.
And with scope 3 emissions, these are emissions that are normally not directly in
Yeah.
Maersk's control.
Yes.
So do you have any supplier agreements with your suppliers, people further down the supply chain, to make sure that they do certain activities in a way that matches with Maersk standards?
Yes. So this is our Scope 3 emissions reductions is something that we, I would say, are starting to work more systematically with. Maersk being a little bit in or not just Maersk, but shipping companies in general, having a little bit of a different greenhouse gas footprint profile compared to many other industries. Because for many or most companies, it will be most typical to have by far the majority of your emissions in your supply chain, right? So for some companies, you might have 90% of your emissions in scope 3. Because we're so let's say heavy on the shipping side, it is our scope 1 emissions that actually make up a very large part of our emissions footprint. And recently, what we have found as we have become more sophisticated in our work on mapping and understanding where our scope 3 emissions are coming from across our supply chain, we've actually found that it makes up a larger percentage than we originally thought. However, the emissions in our scope 3, the bulk of those are still connected to the use of maritime fuels for maritime transportation, because in addition to all the vessels that we own, and which where the emissions therefore fall in our scope 1, we also procure a lot of maritime services, and we have vessel sharing agreements, for example, and other things. So, and that falls into our scope 3. So in either case, you could say a big part of our focus on reducing the greenhouse gas footprint of shipping, that will impact both our scope 1 emissions and our scope 3 emissions. Beyond that, of course, when you look at other significant categories within our scope 3, there's things like inland transportation, trucking, for example. And that is an area where, to get back to your original point, where it definitely requires us to then work in a more systematic way with our suppliers, and with a much more fragmented supplier landscape than we have in shipping, right? So when we procure trucking services, for example, it's often across many different countries and locations. You know, Maersk, our business, our global business, we operate in over 130 countries. And the trucking industry, as such, is also one which is typically quite fragmented, many small suppliers. So in that way, it's also really critical that we work both with the individual supplier relationships, but also looking to the data systems and platforms that we have in place, just to be able to capture the information from the supply chain, and ultimately be able to deliver to our customers high quality and credible data on emissions reductions across the full scope of the logistics supply chain that we handle for them.
Yes, I can imagine this is such a complicated process, especially for like a logistics company like Maersk. Um, so actually, this brings me to a question that's maybe a little bit out of our scope, but with all the talk about AI recently, I'm wondering whether this comes into play with any of your platforms that can really help you better capture data or better connect the different, say, trucking contractors that you work with.
Well, absolutely, and I mean, there's no question that IT as such is critical, right, to deliver on our ambitions, because we need really good systems in place, as said, and that also goes for, if you look to our vessels today, how they operate, there are systems in place that enable us to track um, in real time, right? How our consumption of fuels, depending also on that can be weather conditions or delays along the route or whatever, and allow us to optimize the network and the vessel's journey. Um, but the same, as I said, does not exist across the full logistics chain today, right? Because for the same factors that I was just alluding to before, much more fragmented supplier landscape and across many different jurisdictions, where there can also be different regulations in place and different, the big challenge connected also to the infrastructure that we need to have in place to support these green offerings to customers. If you imagine, electric vehicles and charging opportunities, et cetera, right? For example. So all of this is highly complex, and we are in general, I think AI as such, of course, is going a step beyond just the IT infrastructure. But we do, of course, see a lot of opportunities to use AI to optimize our offerings across different segments, not only for sustainability purposes, but also for other, in terms of speed and quality and etc. We're also, of course, aware of the, let's say, potential concerns in terms of, we also actually, if you look at our yes, and so, for example, our ESG strategy as such, we've spoken a lot so far about our decarbonization efforts, but of course, our wider ESG strategy encompasses a focus on 14 programs or categories across environment, social governance, and one of them is actually data ethics, which is also, as you see, an expression of recognition from our side that it's important to keep an eye on the our responsibility also, right, to use and apply data and technology in an ethical manner.
Absolutely true. Yes. And I can imagine just how, uh, I guess, how vast your role is, because it just encompasses all of these aspects. It's not like the environmental net zero goals is just one small part of what you're in charge of. And we'll speak a little bit more about that in the next section. But right now, I just want to ask a bit more about the green infrastructure that you mentioned. You mentioned that sometimes it's challenging because in different regimes across the globe, there are different regulations that maybe enable or sort of disrupt some of your net zero plans. Uh, are there particular countries that are more friendly towards green infrastructure and more where they have regulations that really support the building of green infrastructure compared to other countries?
Well, I think the most significant thing that's playing out in the last year or so when it comes to the green transition is, it seems that there's almost a race, a competition beginning to happen among different regions and countries to actually position different countries and gain benefits from the green transition. So we see that in the EU has for quite some years been taking a leadership role and an advanced position in driving forward the green transition, also having a lot of regulations, requirements, high standards in place for companies that operate in the EU, right, on and very ambitious climate goals as well. Then recently, the U.S. with the Inflation Reduction Act really put a turbo charge on the green transition, also with putting in place a lot of incentives for companies, right, to invest in green technologies. And in turn now the EU has then also put measures in place. So there's a whole, and we see also India and others also gearing up. And in general, Maersk is also uh, very supportive, of course, of all measures across different regions and countries, because ultimately we need, ideally from our perspective, because we are a business operating globally, we would like to see global measures put in place, right, and a global collaboration, a global level playing field for our business. That's the case, of course, within the shipping industry. You have a global regulator, the International Maritime Organization, um, and we're looking forward to the upcoming. There's meetings upcoming this summer at the IMO, where we hope to see more ambitious legislation, more ambitious climate strategy coming out from the IMO. But we definitely also need regional and national measures to support, and again also to accelerate, right, the investments and capacity, the scale up of renewable electricity, of hydrogen capacity, and these things, which are all critical to underpin the green transition, not only for shipping but really for many different industries that will need to leverage these technologies to be able to transition.
So for an organization like the IMO, if they do set more climate goals this summer, is this are these regulations or goals something that most of the shipping companies will be required to follow, or is this just a
Yes.
standard that's there?
No, so this is global regulation. The shipping is one of the very few industries, if not the only industry, that is actually regulated globally through the IMO. But the way that the IMO then negotiates is it's the member states that actually come together and agree on the measures that are then implemented through the IMO. So that means it can sometimes be a quite heavy process, a lot of political negotiations, of course, a lot of sometimes differences of opinion across these countries.
Right. So, Lene, you said the International Maritime Organization is an organization that regulates the shipping industry, but with so many member states involved, I'm pretty sure it's a very complicated process. Um, does the IMO actually, is it an effective organization in regulating the industry and really advancing climate goals, do you think?
Well, so this is a little bit. There's two ways to answer this, right? Because on the one hand, it's incredibly effective that once we have agreement and regulations in place, then it applies globally.
Hmm.
Uh, However, the challenge is, because indeed there are many different member states, many different interests, then it takes longer to get to an agreement. So that's why it can be slow, and that's why when you look at the upcoming meetings are really important, because one of the things that we hope will finally be accomplished is to increase the ambition level of the IMO's climate ambition. Currently, the IMO's climate strategy is to reduce only by 50% emissions for 2050. So you can see this is much less than is actually needed to keep shipping on a Paris-aligned track. So we hope that we will now see a raised ambition level, an agreement in the IMO on a net zero ambition for 2050. In addition,
Hmm.
there are some near-term measures that we also think are incredibly important to work towards for 2030, which will incentivize action also from the shipping industry. So we're also advocating, for example, for a global carbon price, a levy on shipping, which will help to also um, level the playing field between the current fossil fuels and
Mm-hmm.
future green fuels, where today there's the a major challenge is that green fuels are more expensive than fossil fuels, right? So having a global carbon price on shipping will actually serve to
Level the
bring
playing
those
field. Mm-hmm.
two options into an equal scenario for our customers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. I actually didn't know the shipping industry is one of the few that's regulated globally.
Mhm.
But that's good to know, and it's very necessary for an industry like shipping. So this leads into my final question for this section, which is that related to or international organizations like the IMO. What do you think bigger conferences and bigger summits like the Paris summit that just happened in France, or like COP, the Conference of the Parties? What do you think those types of conferences have to play in this net zero landscape? And do you think these are effective at all in pushing climate goals forward?
Well, I mean, if you look to the Paris agreement, ultimately going back to that one in 2015, that was the first time actually that the global community did manage to come together and agree on the you say what is the future we want to see, and the limit well below 2 degrees and ideally 1.5 degree for global warming. So in that sense, again, when these processes work, they are extremely good because they set that common and aligned goal, which we can then also, from the private sector, get behind and support and do our bit to actually make come alive. The challenge is that, of course, in recent years, and not least, of course, when you look to the wider situation in the world and all the geopolitical developments, that there's a lot more risks and barriers to actually different governments and parties coming together and agreeing and taking action, really, right,
Mm,
towards those goals. So I can understand why um, uh, certainly, perhaps what we where we see more positive progress at the moment is more, perhaps within specific industries or certain companies. And am pleased to see that Maersk is certainly one of the companies that is taking ambitious action to uh, you know make our ambitions come to reality. But so we probably are more seeing these pieces of action, which are very much driven not necessarily through activity at the COP level, but through the market expectations that we now have from our customers, for example, right? We are very oriented towards how can we serve our customers' needs and help them decarbonize their supply chains. That's also accentuated for us as well
mm,
as our customers through the expectations coming in from wider society, from end users, from investors as well, very much through the financial
mm,
sector and through national and regional regulation, right? So I think that
mm,
the COPs in themselves are no longer the only place to look
mm,
for ambition and action. You really have to look to
mm.
what's happening in the markets.
Okay. Yes, yes, absolutely. I think it's a lot of factors at play here when when we're trying to advance the climate goals. And it's more and more we're seeing a societal pressure, like you said, financial
Yes.
regulation, all the things pushing towards moving towards net zero. And I think that has also really accelerated corporate sustainability goals. And
Yes.
again, like you said, I think companies like Maersk are also leading in that. Like, I think it by you guys taking the step forward, and leading, like, other companies in the shipping or transportation industry will feel the need to do the same.
Yes.
Like, amazing, absolutely amazing work, and I really look forward to what's coming next for Maersk. Um, and this is the end of the first part of the podcast. Um, and I will be continuing my conversation with Lene Serpa in the next episode. So please keep your ears open for part 2. And for now, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk Sustainable Business. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at www.conference-board.org. And if you have any thoughts to share with us, you can email us at sustainability@tcb.org.